One type of ceramics texture is impression texture. Impression texture tends to create an indent in the clay, but does not remove any clay, and the way you create indents is by pressing various objects into the clay to create a pattern or texture or design on the clay. So you can take flat objects, whether they're man-made or natural, and press them into the clay. Sometimes you might use something like a rolling pin or whatever you happen to have on hand to roll that object pressed into the clay. And then carefully remove that object. To leave an impressed pattern on the clay. You might use a designed stamp, or in this case possibly even a ring with a design on it, to stamp or roll into the clay surface. You can even use regular clay tools to create impressed patterns or textures in the clay by using them repeatedly to create an overall design. Another type of clay texture is subtractive texture. Subtractive texture creates indents or holes in the clay by removing clay. So unlike impressions, where you're not removing any clay, you're only pressing a pattern or texture into the clay, subtraction, you are actually physically removing clay from the main object. You can use things like pin tools to carve all the way through, to remove an entire area of clay. And the hole becomes a subtractive area. You can use other tools, carving tools, to carve a partial carve through. Or you can use those same subtractive tools to create an intentional texture rather than a specific design per se. Now it's important to note that whenever you're doing subtractive texture, often your initial work is not very neat. So make an effort to go along the edges and smooth rough patches out on carved away areas, as well as the inside areas of carving. You can use your fingers, you can use wood knives, you can use damp paint brushes, but you want to neaten up these carved areas so that they look beautiful on the clay and not just some half-finished effort. Our third and final type of texture for clay is additive texture. So with subtractive, we were removing clay. With imprint, we were pressing objects into the clay. With additive, we were now building up additional clay on top of the clay surface. Whenever you're doing additive techniques, you're going to need to use a technique called slipping and scoring. I will show that to you shortly. So one of the ways that you can do additive is roll out a second piece of slab, usually a little bit thinner than your base piece, and you can add that onto your base piece of clay. However, you can't just toss it on there and hope that it's going to stay. It's not going to happen. So you want to slip and score objects on. In order to make sure your slipping and scoring is happening in the right area, I usually trace the outline of my object really quickly in the clay so I know where it's going. Once I have that mark, I'm going to take a tool like a pin tool or another thin carving tool and make some scoring marks. They don't need to be beautiful, but they should be deep enough that when we put the thin clay on there, it has somewhere to sink into. We're also going to put it on the back of our object that we're attaching. Then you want to apply your slip kind of like cream cheese. You don't want it thin. A little extra gushing out the sides as you attach is not a bad thing. Set down your cutout object onto your clay. Carefully press down. Once it's positioned well, I usually wiggle my object back and forth just a little bit to kind of push the slip into all the scoring grooves I made. But now I've got slip all over the place, which isn't really an acceptable finished product. So by using wood knives of various types, I can finish attaching my object and smoothing out the excess slip around it. So I'm putting my wood knife into the edge of my upper object, scraping the edge down onto the base piece, and smoothing away any excess slip. This is helping to really firmly join my top piece to my base piece and neatening up my edges. I don't want any gaps left between the top and the bottom pieces. So you can see how gaps are disappearing and excess slip is disappearing as I do this. So now my piece is fully attached, all my gaps are gone, and my excess slip has been removed. I might touch up the edges with a damp paintbrush to finish cleaning everything up to make it really look nice. Now, sometimes you don't want to just attach a specific object, but you want to create an all-over texture. And sometimes that texture involves lots of little small objects being attached, in which case it's a little bit impractical to just go ahead and slip and score both the objects and the clay it's attaching to. So if I wanted to create an area filled with a bunch of little spines or spikes, I can start rolling some of those out for myself. Once I've got a few ready, I can pre-score the area that I want to attach them to. And add my slip. Again, remember, it's hard to have a little too much, but there's definitely a realm of not enough slip. Things tend to fall off after they dry or fire if there's not enough slip and scoring going on. Then I can press my additive pieces into that area I'm using a little bit of that wiggling again to help set things in place. And then I can work around my objects again with the wood knife and help join them just a little bit more firmly to my base piece, and also scrape away excess slip. So now you can see I have a set of spikes. I could do that all over my surface of clay if I wanted to add a all over interesting additive texture. Again, I would probably use a damp paintbrush to go ahead and clean up the last bits of excess slip to make it look really nice.